Hey everyone, and welcome back for another deep dive. We always try to bring you the latest and most interesting stuff, and today's topic is no exception. Before we get into it, though, just a quick note. We pull information from all sorts of places to put these deep dives together, and we use AI to help make them. They're really just meant for learning and keeping things interesting, and we can't promise everything is completely accurate. So please be smart about how you use the info, and keep in mind this isn't professional advice or anything. With that out of the way, let's jump into the world of quantum computing. You send us some really interesting stuff from a major player in tech and an expert analysis of the whole situation. And honestly, it's got us pretty intrigued. It seems like there's a bit of a back and forth happening when it comes to just how close we are to seeing quantum computers really make a difference.
Yeah, it definitely seems to be a hot topic right now, especially with with some of the recent comments that have been made.
Exactly. So we're going to break it all down for you. We'll start with what the CEO of Nvidia, a big tech company, initially said about quantum computing and how that kind of shook things up a bit.
Right, his initial comments seem to have caused quite a stir.
Then we'll look at what he said later, like an update, or maybe even, like a whoops, maybe I oversimplified things kind of moment.
It does appear there was a bit of a shift in tone.
For sure. Then we'll bring in Richard Windsor, a tech expert, and his analysis, which actually lines up with what the CEO initially said about how long it'll be before we see a real impact from quantum computers.
Windsor definitely takes a more cautious approach.
He does. We'll also explore some of the huge technical hurdles that are still in the way and what the major tech companies like Google, Microsoft, and Amazon are doing in this field. We're talking about the giants here.
It's certainly a space where the biggest players are actively involved.
And then we'll wrap things up by looking at what all of this means for companies that are all about quantum computing and where Nvidia fits into all of this, especially with the focus on AI. You ready to get quantum with it?
Let's dive in.
So first things first. The CEO of Nvidia made some pretty bold statements about how far off practical quantum computing really is. He said it's not just around the corner, not even close, maybe even years away. And let me tell you, when someone at the top of the company as influential as Nvidia says something like that about what many consider the future of computing, people listen.
Oh, they definitely listen. And in this case, it seems the market reacted pretty strongly.
Right. The sources we looked at showed that the stock prices for some quantum computing companies took a real hit, some dropping more than 40%. That's a huge swing. It really shows how much weight people put on the words of leaders in the tech world, especially when it comes to cutting-edge stuff like this. I mean, imagine what would have happened if he'd been super optimistic, right?
I think we can all agree it would have been a completely different story.
Totally. But it looks like he didn't stop there. He addressed those initial comments later on at a major NVIDIA event. He even presented a session about quantum computing, almost like he was testing the waters, seeing if maybe he'd been too quick to judge.
So was he backtracking, walking things back a bit?
Well, maybe. Reports say he clarified that he wasn't even really considering those publicly traded quantum companies when he first spoke, and he acknowledged the massive potential of quantum computing. He even sounded a bit more optimistic about the impact it could have. But, and this is key, he didn't shy away from how incredibly complex this whole thing actually is.
Which is fair, right? It's not like building a slightly faster laptop. We're talking about a whole new way of thinking about computing.
Absolutely. But here's the thing, even with this, let's call it revised outlook, the stock prices for quantum computing companies, they kept falling. It's almost like investors were saying, okay, nice words, but show us the progress. It's not just about hype, it's about the tech itself.
Which is where Richard Windsor's analysis comes into play, right? He seems to be in the same camp as the CEO's initial assessment.
He is. Windsor basically says, look, quantum computing is fascinating, but it's not going to take over the world anytime soon. His analysis predicts it'll be at least 15 years before we see any significant economic impact, and he has some pretty solid reasoning for this.
So what's his argument? Why the long wait?
Well, Windsor really emphasizes that quantum computers aren't simply like a souped-up version of the computers we use every day. He argues that they're more like specialized tools, incredibly powerful for very specific kinds of tasks, but not so much for everything else. Like, if you try to force a quantum computer to do things it's not designed for, you lose all the advantages and are just left with a super complicated, super expensive machine.
I see. So no quantum-powered smartphones in our pockets anytime soon.
Nope, not likely. At least not according to Windsor's assessment. He sees the real potential applications being in very specific areas, Think really advanced scientific research, super complex simulations, and very particular types of optimization problems.
So really specialized stuff.
Exactly. And while these are all important areas, they don't necessarily scream mass market appeal. And that kind of casts a shadow on whether the current valuations of some quantum computing companies are realistic.
I mean, it makes you wonder, right? Are we getting ahead of ourselves with all the excitement?
It's a valid question, and Windsor doesn't stop there. He also gets into the nitty-gritty, the real technical hurdles that still need to be cleared. And these aren't small hurdles. We're talking scaling up the technology, making sure it's reliable. These are huge challenges.
Okay, so break it down for us. What are the big roadblocks?
Well, it all comes down to those qubits, the building blocks of quantum computers. Getting a large number of them to work together on a single chip is like trying to herd cats. They're incredibly sensitive to any kind of disturbance, and even when you manage to create more, keeping the error rates low enough to do complex calculations, it's a nightmare.
Yeah, I've heard these things are incredibly delicate. Like, even the slightest change in temperature or vibration can throw them off.
It's true, and the worst part, the quantum computing industry hasn't even decided on the best way to tackle these problems. It's like everyone's trying to build a spaceship, but using different blueprints and arguing about the type of fuel to use.
So no unified approach. That seems like a recipe for, oh, for a lot of wasted time and effort.
You got it. And that's another point that Windsor makes. We've got these huge tech companies like Google, Microsoft, Amazon, all developing their own quantum systems, but they're all doing it their own way. There's no standardization, no clear winner emerging in terms of technology or approach.
It's almost like the early days of personal computer, with all these different operating systems and platforms vying for dominance.
Exactly. And while all this innovation is exciting, it also means it's much harder to get that economy of scale you need for widespread adoption. It's like trying to build a railroad when everyone's tracks are different gauges.
So what does all of this mean for those companies that are fully dedicated to quantum computing? The ones that are publicly traded and everything?
Well, Windsor's not exactly optimistic about their future. He thinks a lot of them, as they exist now, won't make it. Some will probably just disappear, while others will likely get swallowed up by the big fish, the Googles, Amazons, and Microsofts of the world. Those guys have deep pockets and can afford to play the long game.
It's almost a classic case of survival of the fittest, or in this case, perhaps survival of the richest.
Right, which is a good reminder that investing in cutting-edge tech, while potentially lucrative, also carries big risks.
Speaking of big players, let's talk about Nvidia. Even though the CEO initially seemed skeptical about quantum computing, they're still investing in research, even have a dedicated quantum research center now. It's like they're hedging their bets, right?
Yeah, that's what Windsor thinks too. He sees their involvement as a smart move, dipping their toes in the water. But he also believes their main focus is still where it should be, on AI. And that makes sense. AI is having a massive impact right now, across so many industries. It's not some far-off dream. It's here. It's happening.
It's the practical, proven technology versus the future potential.
Precisely. So to wrap things up, here's where we stand with quantum computing. We had a major tech figure casting doubt on its near-term impact, which caused ripples in the market. He later softened his stance a bit, but the core message remained. Quantum computing is incredibly complex and far from being a mainstream technology. Then we have the expert analysis, which largely backs up this cautious view, predicting a much longer timeline before we see quantum computers truly changing the game.
And don't forget the huge technical hurdles that still need to be overcome. We're talking about scaling up the technology, reducing errors, and figuring out the best way to build these incredibly sensitive machines. Plus, we have all these brilliant minds working on it, but in their own separate lanes.
Exactly. It's like a quantum symphony where everyone's playing a different tune. And for those companies betting everything on quantum, the future is looking a bit uncertain. Many might not survive the long journal, while others might end up as part of a bigger tech empire. Meanwhile, Nvidia, they're playing it smart, keeping an eye on quantum while doubling down on AI, which is already a force to be reckoned with.
So lots of potential, lots of challenges, and a long road ahead.
That's a great way to put it. But here's something to think about. Even though we might have to wait a while for quantum computing to really hit its stride, what if, somewhere in a lab, someone makes a breakthrough? A fundamental discovery that changes everything, accelerates the timeline, and unlocks the true power of quantum. It's not impossible, right?
You never know what the future holds. There are brilliant minds working on this all over the world.
That's what makes it so exciting. This is just the beginning of the quantum story, and we can't wait to see how it unfolds. But for now, that's it for this deep dive. If you found this fascinating, don't forget to like, subscribe, share, and let us know your thoughts in the comments. What do you think the future holds for quantum computing? We'd love to hear your predictions. Until next time.